Alex Carter had always been the kind of guy who valued peace and quiet. He wasn't flashy or loud. He preferred simple joys over grand gestures. That's why moving to Willow Creek Estates, a picturesque, gated community with manicured lawns, tree-lined streets, and friendly neighbors, felt like a dream come true for him and his wife, Sarah. It was supposed to be their fresh start, a place where they could build memories without the chaos of city life breathing down their necks. First, everything seemed perfect. The neighborhood sparkled under the sun, every house painted in warm tones that gave off an inviting vibe. Kids rode bikes on the sidewalks, couples strolled hand in hand, and retirees sat on porches sipping lemonade. But beneath this idyllic surface lay something Alex hadn't anticipated: the Homeowners Association, HOA. The HOA at Willow Creek wasn't just your run-of-the-mill governing body. No, these folks took rules to a whole new level. From the color of front doors to the height of hedges, nothing escaped their watchful eyes. At first, Alex thought it was harmless, a little quirky, maybe even charming in its own way. After all, rules existed to maintain order, right? But soon enough, those seemingly harmless regulations began to feel suffocating. It started small. A letter slipped under their door one morning informed them that their mailbox needed repainting because it didn't match the approved shade of white. Another notice arrived a week later, reminding them to park their car only in designated areas, after 8 p.m. Then came warnings about leaving trash bins visible past collection day. Each infraction carried a fine, which added up quickly if ignored. Sarah tried to brush it off. "They're just being picky," she'd say with a laugh while tossing yet another warning letter into the recycling bin. But Alex couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. The letters felt more like threats than polite reminders. And then there were the patrols. Late at night, when most people were asleep, strange cars would creep through the neighborhood. Their headlights dimmed, engines barely audible. They moved slowly, almost deliberately. Sometimes Alex would spot men in uniform stepping out of these vehicles, clipboard in hand, jotting notes as they inspected houses. Who were these people? Were they really authorized by the HOA? Or were they just freelancers hired to enforce petty rules? One Friday afternoon, Alex left work early to surprise Sarah with dinner plans. She loved gardening, and he knew she'd spent the entire day tending to her prized flower beds. As he pulled into the driveway, he saw her kneeling on the grass, carefully arranging pots along the walkway. Her hands were dirty, her hair tied back, and she looked content, a rare moment of calm amidst the whirlwind of their move. But before Alex could call out to her, a black SUV screeched to a halt near the curb. Two men jumped out wearing ill-fitting uniforms that looked hastily stitched together. One wore a cap too big for his head, while the other's badge hung crookedly from his shirt pocket. They approached Sarah with an air of authority that seemed forced, unnatural. "Ma'am, we need you to remove that pot immediately," one of them barked, pointing at a tiny ceramic planter shaped like a frog. "It violates Section 3.2 of the HOA guidelines." Sarah stood up, brushing dirt from her jeans. "Excuse me?" she said, clearly confused. "What's wrong with my planter?" "It's not regulation approved," the second man chimed in, consulting his clipboard. "You'll have to take it inside within the hour, or we'll issue a citation." Alex watched from the car, his jaw tightening. These guys weren't official. They couldn't be. Something about them screamed imposters. Still, he stayed put, curious to see how Sarah would handle the situation. "I'm sorry," Sarah replied calmly, though her voice carried a hint of frustration. "I'll deal with it later. Right now, I'm busy." The taller of the two men stepped closer, invading her personal space. "You don't understand," he growled. "We're enforcing the rules here. Either comply or face the consequences." Before Sarah could respond, the man shoved her roughly against the garage door. The sound of her body hitting the metal echoed across the yard. Alex's blood ran cold. In an instant, he was out of the car, sprinting toward them. "What do you think you're doing?" he shouted, his voice trembling with rage. The men froze, startled by his sudden appearance. For a moment, no one spoke. Then, realizing they were outnumbered, they scrambled back into their SUV and sped off, tires squealing against the pavement. Alex dropped to his knees beside Sarah, who was clutching her side, tears streaming down her face. "Are you okay?" he asked, panic rising in his chest. She nodded weakly but winced as she tried to sit up. "My ribs. I think they're hurt." He called 911 immediately, his mind racing. Who were those men? Why had they targeted Sarah? And what made them think they had the right to act like thugs in broad daylight? When paramedics arrived, they confirmed Sarah had cracked ribs, a painful injury that would require weeks of rest and recovery. As Alex held her hand in the ambulance, guilt gnawed at him. He should have intervened sooner. He should have protected her. But deep down, he knew this wasn't just about him failing to act in time. This was about a system that allowed such abuse to happen unchecked. That night, as Sarah slept fitfully in their bed, Alex vowed to find answers and ensure no one else in Willow Creek Estates ever faced what they did. Little did he know this incident was only the beginning of a much darker chapter in their lives. The days following the attack on Sarah were a blur of pain, frustration, and unanswered questions. Alex stayed by her side as much as possible, helping her with even the simplest tasks, getting out of bed, walking to the bathroom, or reaching for a glass of water. Every movement brought sharp jabs of pain, and Sarah's cheerful demeanor began to fade under the weight of her injury. She tried to put on a brave face, but Alex could see the toll it was taking on her. The vibrant woman who once spent hours in the garden, humming softly to herself, now lay on the couch, staring blankly at the ceiling. Alex, on the other hand, was consumed by anger. It wasn't just about what had happened to Sarah. It was the helplessness he felt in protecting her. He replayed the scene over and over in his mind, the SUV screeching to a halt, the fake uniforms, the aggressive tone of the men who claimed to represent the HOA. Something about them didn't add up. No legitimate organization would send untrained thugs to harass residents over trivial matters like flower pots. But when Alex called the police to report the incident, things only grew more confusing. The responding officer arrived promptly, jotting down notes as Alex recounted every detail. "Did you get their names?" the officer asked, pen poised above his notepad. "No," Alex replied, shaking his head. "They never introduced themselves properly. Their badges looked fake and their uniforms weren't consistent." The officer frowned. "And you said they drove off in an SUV?" "Yes, black, no license plates," Alex confirmed. "I'm sure someone must have seen it around the neighborhood before." After finishing his report, the officer promised to look into the matter. However, his next words sent a chill through Alex. "Sir, I'll be honest with you. We haven't received any official complaints about HOA patrols behaving this way. If these guys aren't legit, they're operating outside the law." That statement stuck with Alex long after the officer left. Outside the law. The phrase echoed in his mind, unsettling and ominous. If the police couldn't identify these men, how could ordinary residents like him and Sarah ever feel safe? That night, as Sarah drifted off to sleep, Alex sat alone in the living room, scrolling through online forums and news articles about similar incidents. What he discovered chilled him to the bone. In nearby neighborhoods, there had been whispers of rogue groups posing as HOA enforcers. These imposters preyed on unsuspecting homeowners, using intimidation tactics to extort money or compliance. Some victims reported being fined exorbitant amounts for minor infractions, while others described violent encounters eerily similar to what Sarah endured. Yet, despite mounting evidence, local authorities seemed powerless or unwilling to intervene. It was as if these criminals operated in plain sight, shielded by ambiguity and fear. As the days turned into weeks, Alex became increasingly restless. He couldn't shake the image of those two men shoving Sarah against the garage door. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw her crumple to the ground, heard the sickening thud of her body hitting the concrete. His stomach churned with guilt. He should have acted faster. He should have stopped them. But deep down he knew that confronting them without preparation would have been reckless. They might have had weapons, backup, or worse intentions. Still, the thought gnawed at him relentlessly. Sarah tried to reassure him, sensing the storm brewing inside him. "It's not your fault, Alex," she whispered one evening, her voice strained from pain. You did everything you could. Should have done more, he muttered, avoiding her gaze. I let them hurt you. You saved me. She insisted, squeezing his hand weakly. If you hadn't come outside when you did, who knows what might have happened? Her words offered little comfort. Alex knew she was trying to ease his guilt, but the truth remained. He hadn't been prepared. And if those men returned, if anyone like them decided to target their home again, he wouldn't hesitate to act differently next time. Determined to take matters into his own hands, Alex began researching ways to protect his family. A former Marine, he still owned several firearms legally registered in his name, including an M4 rifle he'd kept stored away since leaving the service. Though he hoped never to use it, the situation called for drastic measures. He retrieved the weapon from its case, cleaned it meticulously, and practiced assembling and disassembling it until his movements were fluid and instinctive. But arming himself wasn't enough. Alex realized they needed layers of security to deter potential threats. He installed high-definition cameras around the perimeter of their property, positioning them strategically to cover blind spots. Motion-activated floodlights illuminated the driveway and backyard, ensuring no one could approach unnoticed. He also invested in a state-of-the-art alarm system linked directly to his phone, allowing him to monitor activity remotely. Every step he took made him feel slightly more in control, but the underlying tension persisted. Sarah noticed the change in him. The way his jaw clenched whenever headlights passed their house. The way his hand instinctively hovered near the concealed handgun he now carried everywhere. She understood his need to prepare, but part of her worried about where this path might lead. Do you think it's worth it? She asked one night, breaking the silence between them. All this? Preparing for the worst? Alex hesitated, weighing his response carefully. I don't know, he admitted finally. But I can't sit back and wait for something else to happen. Not after what they did to you. Sarah nodded slowly, though unease lingered in her expression. Just promise me you won't do anything reckless, she said softly. Promise me you'll think things through. I will, Alex assured her, though inwardly, he questioned whether thinking things through was truly an option anymore. In his heart he knew one thing for certain. If anyone dared to threaten his family again, they would face consequences far greater than a slap on the wrist. Meanwhile, the investigation into the fake HOA patrolman stalled. The police followed, up with Alex periodically, asking if he'd spotted the suspicious SUV again or if he'd remembered any additional details. But each time, their tone grew less hopeful. Without concrete leads, like identifying the vehicle or tracking down witnesses, the case seemed destined to go cold. For Alex, this lack of progress was infuriating. How could the system fail so completely? These men had assaulted his wife, violated their sense of safety, and disappeared without a trace. Yet here he was, expected to simply move on and trust that justice would eventually prevail. Trust wasn't something Alex had much of left. One evening, as he reviewed footage from the newly installed security cameras, Alex spotted something that made his blood run cold. A dark sedan cruised slowly past their house, its driver peering intently at their property. The car didn't belong to any neighbor Alex recognized, and it matched the description of vehicles mentioned in other reports of fake HOA patrols. His pulse quickened as he zoomed in on the grainy image, memorizing the make and model. Could it be them? Had they returned? Alex grabbed his phone and dialed the non-emergency line for the police department. I think I may have spotted the same vehicle involved in my wife's assault, he explained, providing the timestamp and details from the camera feed. The dispatcher assured him they'd send an officer to review the footage, but Alex knew, better than to expect immediate results. That night, as he lay awake beside Sarah, his mind raced with possibilities. If those men were watching their house, what did they want? Were they planning another visit? Or were they merely testing boundaries, seeing how far they could push before someone fought back? Whatever their motives, Alex resolved not to give them another chance. From now on, he would stay vigilant, ready to defend his family at a moment's notice. Because one thing was clear, Waiting for justice wasn't working. Sometimes, you had to create it yourself. As the days stretched into weeks, Alex's transformation became undeniable. The quiet, unassuming man who once prided himself on blending into the background was now a figure of relentless determination. Every waking moment seemed devoted to one goal: ensuring that his family would never again be vulnerable to the kind of attack that had left Sarah with cracked ribs and shattered peace of mind. His resolve hardened like steel, tempered by anger and fueled by love for his wife. The first thing Alex did after fortifying their home was revisit his military training. Though years had passed since he'd served as a Marine, the skills he'd honed during those intense months in uniform came flooding back, as if no time had elapsed at all. He spent hours watching tactical videos online, brushing up on defensive strategies and practicing situational awareness techniques. Each session reminded him of the discipline required to face danger head-on, not recklessly, but with precision and purpose. He also revisited local laws regarding self-defense. Alex knew he couldn't afford to make mistakes. Acting impulsively could land him in legal trouble, even if his intentions were pure. So he studied statutes related to castle doctrine and stand-your-ground laws, familiarizing himself with the boundaries of what constituted justifiable force. Armed with this knowledge, he felt more confident about where the line lay between protecting his family and crossing into vigilantism. Sarah noticed the change in him too. Gone was the laid-back husband who used to laugh off minor inconveniences. In his place stood someone sharper, more alert, almost like a different person entirely. She admired his dedication but couldn't help feeling uneasy. "You're scaring me a little," she admitted one evening as they sat together in the living room. Alex looked up from the manual he'd been reading, surprised by her comment. "Scaring you? Why?" "It's just, you seem so focused on preparing for the worst," she said hesitantly. "Like you're waiting for something bad to happen." "I am waiting," Alex replied matter-of-factly. "Because if I don't prepare, then what happens when they come back? What happens if someone else gets hurt because I wasn't ready?" Sarah sighed, leaning back against the couch. "I get it. Really, I do. But sometimes it feels like you're letting them win, like they've taken away your peace of mind." Her words struck a nerve. For a moment, Alex didn't respond. Was she right? Had he let fear dictate his actions? No, he decided firmly. This wasn't about giving in to fear. It was about taking control. If anything, these preparations gave him a sense of agency, a way to fight back against the helplessness that had plagued him since the day Sarah was attacked. To further bolster their defenses, Alex installed additional layers of security around the property. Motion-activated lights illuminated every corner of the yard, making it impossible for anyone to approach undetected. Reinforced locks replaced old ones on doors and windows, while heavy-duty curtains shielded their home from prying eyes. Even the garage door received an upgrade, complete with a keypad entry system that only Alex and Sarah knew how to operate. But perhaps the most significant addition was the surveillance system. High-definition cameras covered every angle of the house, feeding live footage to Alex's phone via a secure app. He could monitor activity remotely, whether he was inside the house or miles away running errands. Alerts pinged his device whenever movement triggered the sensors, allowing him to respond instantly to potential threats. Despite these measures, Alex remained acutely aware of the psychological toll such vigilance took on both him and Sarah. Nights were particularly difficult. Sleep eluded him more often than not, his ears straining for any unusual sound. A car engine idling too long, footsteps crunching gravel outside, even the faint rustle of leaves stirred by wind. Every noise sent his heart racing, each shadow playing tricks on his mind. It was exhausting, yet he refused to let his guard down. One night, as rain pattered against the windows, Alex found himself staring at the security feed displayed on his laptop screen. The cameras showed nothing out of the ordinary, just the empty street glistening under dim streetlights, but his instincts told him otherwise. Something felt off. A nagging sensation gnawed at the edges of his thoughts, urging him to stay awake, to remain vigilant. "Why are you still up?" Sarah murmured groggily from the bedroom doorway, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "It's past midnight." "Can't sleep," Alex admitted, rubbing his temples. "Something doesn't feel right." She walked over to him, peering at the monitor. "Everything looks fine to me." "I know," he said, frustration creeping into his voice, "but I can't shake this feeling, like we're being watched." Sarah placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Maybe you need a break. You've been pushing yourself so hard lately." "I can't afford to take a break," he shot back, though not unkindly. "Not until I know we're safe." Her expression softened. "I understand, but you can't keep going like this forever. You'll burn out." Alex sighed, leaning back in his chair. Maybe she was right. Maybe he needed to find some balance between preparation and paranoia. But how could he relax when the threat loomed so large? Those men, the fake HOA enforcers, hadn't been caught. They were still out there somewhere, possibly planning their next move. And until they were brought to justice, Alex couldn't afford to lower his guard. The following morning, Alex decided to take Sarah's advice, at least partially. Instead of obsessing over every detail of their security setup, he turned his attention outward, seeking ways to share his newfound knowledge with others in the community. After all, if rogue patrols posed a danger to him and Sarah, they likely targeted other residents as well. By raising awareness, he might prevent another family from suffering the same fate. He started small, posting anonymous tips on neighborhood message boards and social media groups. "Beware of suspicious vehicles claiming to represent the HOA." One post read, "Legitimate officers carry proper identification and won't resort to intimidation tactics. Always verify credentials before complying with requests." Other messages offered practical advice on securing homes and recognizing signs of imposters. To his surprise, the response was overwhelming. Dozens of neighbors chimed in, sharing their own experiences with questionable encounters. Some recounted receiving bogus fines for minor infractions, while others described run-ins with aggressive individuals demanding immediate compliance. One woman even claimed her elderly father had been threatened with eviction unless he paid an exorbitant fee for a supposed violation. Reading through these accounts filled Alex with a mix of relief and dread. Relief because he wasn't alone in his suspicions. Clearly others had noticed the same red flags. Dread because it confirmed his worst fears. This wasn't an isolated incident. Someone, or some group, was deliberately exploiting homeowners' trust for personal gain. Encouraged by the feedback, Alex organized a virtual meeting for concerned residents. Using a secure video conferencing platform, he invited anyone interested in discussing safety concerns and brainstorming solutions. To his amazement, nearly 30 people joined the call, eager to share stories and collaborate on strategies. During the meeting, Alex outlined the steps he'd taken to protect his own home, emphasizing the importance of documentation and communication. "We need to stick together," he urged. "If we report suspicious activity collectively, authorities will have a harder time ignoring us. Strength lies in numbers." Several participants nodded in agreement, vowing to install cameras and document interactions with alleged HOA representatives. Others suggested creating a shared database where residents could log incidents and track patterns. By pooling resources and information, they hoped to build a case strong enough to prompt action from law enforcement. Though energized by the meeting's success, Alex knew collaboration alone wouldn't solve the problem overnight. Still, it marked a turning point, a shift from isolation to solidarity. For the first time since Sarah's attack, he felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps with collective effort, they could expose the truth and hold the perpetrators accountable. Yet even as optimism grew, Alex remained cautious. He continued monitoring the security cameras religiously, reviewing footage daily for any sign of trouble. And though the neighborhood buzzed with renewed determination, he couldn't shake the feeling that darker forces were lurking just beyond sight, biding their time. Late one evening, as Alex scrolled through the latest batch of recordings, his stomach tightened. There it was again, that black SUV idling near the curb across the street. Its headlights were off, its license plate obscured by mud. Two figures sat inside, barely visible through tinted windows. They weren't moving, just sitting there, watching. Alex's pulse quickened. This was it, the moment he'd been dreading yet simultaneously preparing for. Grabbing his M4 rifle, he moved quietly to the front door, careful not to alert Sarah. He didn't want her involved in whatever unfolded next. As he stepped onto the porch, weapon raised but concealed behind a pillar, he steadied his breathing and focused on the vehicle. Whoever those men were, they'd chosen the wrong house to target tonight. The air was thick with tension as Alex stood on the porch, his heart pounding like a drum in his chest. He gripped the M4 rifle tightly, its weight both familiar and reassuring. Years of military training had taught him how to stay calm under pressure, but this wasn't some distant battlefield. It was his home, his sanctuary. And now, two shadowy figures were parked outside, watching it like predators sizing up their prey. The black SUV sat motionless across the street, its engine idling softly. The rain from earlier had stopped, leaving behind a slick sheen on the pavement that reflected the dim glow of the streetlights. Every detail seemed sharper in the quiet stillness. The faint hum of tires against wet asphalt, the rhythmic tick of water dripping from gutters, and the dull metallic gleam of the SUV's frame. Alex's mind raced as he analyzed the situation. Were they here to intimidate, to threaten, or worse? He took a deep breath, forcing himself to focus. Panic wouldn't help anyone right now. Instead, he relied on instinct and discipline, just as he'd been trained to do. His eyes scanned the vehicle, noting every nuance. The windows were heavily tinted, making it impossible to see inside clearly. But Alex could make out vague silhouettes. Two men sitting side by side, neither moving much. They weren't talking or gesturing. They simply waited as if biding their time. What were they waiting for? Did they plan to approach the house again, armed and ready to escalate things further? Or were they testing him, seeing if he'd react? Whatever their intentions, Alex knew one thing for certain. He couldn't afford to be passive. Not after what happened to Sarah. If these men posed even the slightest threat, he needed to neutralize it before it spiraled out of control. Carefully, he positioned himself behind a sturdy pillar near the edge of the porch. From this vantage point, he had a clear view of the driveway and the SUV while remaining partially concealed. It was a tactical advantage, allowing him to observe without exposing himself fully. His fingers hovered over the trigger guard, steady but not tense. He reminded himself of the legal boundaries he'd studied so thoroughly. To use force only when absolutely necessary, and always proportionate to the threat. Minutes passed, each second stretching longer than the last. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional chirp of crickets or the distant bark of a dog. Then, finally, movement. One of the car doors creaked open, and a figure stepped out. Alex's muscles tensed as he watched the man emerge into the dim light. Just like before, his uniform looked mismatched, a cheap imitation meant to mimic authority. But there was something different about him this time. His posture was more aggressive, his steps deliberate and slow. Alex's jaw tightened. This wasn't a routine patrol. These men weren't here to issue warnings or citations. Something about their demeanor screamed hostility, and Alex's instincts screamed louder. As the first man approached the curb, another followed suit, stepping out of the passenger side. Both carried flashlights, their beams cutting through the darkness as they swept across the front yard. "Stay where you are," Alex called out firmly, his voice echoing into the night. "You're trespassing." The men froze mid-step, clearly startled by his presence. For a moment, no one moved. Then one of them raised his flashlight, shining it directly toward the porch. Alex squinted against the glare but didn't flinch. He adjusted his stance slightly, ensuring the rifle remained hidden but accessible. The element of surprise was crucial. If they realized he was armed, they might retreat or escalate unpredictably. "What do you want?" Alex demanded, his tone sharp. "State your business." The taller of the two men laughed nervously, trying to sound casual. "Just doing our rounds, sir. Making sure everything's in order." Alex snorted derisively. Cut the act. I've seen your kind before. You're not legitimate HOA officers. Now leave my property, or I'll defend it. His words hung heavy, in the air, carrying an unmistakable edge of warning. The men exchanged glances, their confidence wavering. Clearly, they hadn't expected resistance tonight. Most people probably cowered at the sight of their fake uniforms and authoritative tone, but Alex wasn't most people. He'd faced far greater dangers than two imposters playing dress-up. One of the men took a hesitant step forward, raising his hands in mock surrender. Look, buddy, we don't want any trouble. We're just here to talk. Talk? Alex shot back, incredulous. Is that what you call shoving my wife against a garage door? Is that how you talk to people? The accusation hit its mark. Both men stiffened visibly, exchanging uneasy looks. Alex could practically hear the gears turning in their heads as they debated their next move. Should they press on and risk confrontation, or cut their losses and flee? Before they could decide, Alex made his position crystal clear. With a deliberate motion, he stepped into full view, revealing the M4 rifle slung across his shoulder. The barrel wasn't pointed directly at them, not yet, but the message was loud and undeniable. I'm giving you one chance to walk away, he said, his voice low and steady. Take it or face the consequences. For a split second, time seemed to freeze. The two men stared at him, their bravado crumbling under the weight of his resolve. Then, with a muttered curse, they backed toward their vehicle, hands raised in surrender. Alex kept his gaze locked on them, refusing to let his guard down until they were safely inside the SUV. As the engine roared to life and the taillights disappeared down the street, Alex exhaled slowly, releasing the tension coiled in his body. Adrenaline coursed through his veins, leaving him shaky but alert. He knew better than to assume the danger was over. They might return, possibly with reinforcements, but for now, the immediate threat had been neutralized. Returning to the house, Alex locked the door securely behind him and checked the security cameras once more. Everything appeared calm, but he couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was only the beginning. Still, a small sense of satisfaction settled over him. Tonight, he'd proven that he wouldn't stand idly by while criminals terrorized his family. Justice, however fleeting, had been served, at least for now. Sarah was asleep upstairs, blissfully unaware of the drama that had unfolded below. Alex hesitated for a moment, debating whether to wake her and explain what had happened. Ultimately, he decided against it. She needed rest, not another reason to worry. Besides, he'd promised her he wouldn't act recklessly, and technically he hadn't crossed that line. Yet, as he settled back into the living room chair, rifle resting within arm's reach, Alex allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. Protecting his family wasn't just about weapons or surveillance systems. It was about standing firm when others would falter, about refusing to let fear dictate his actions. And though the road ahead promised challenges, he felt prepared to face them head-on. Tomorrow, he thought grimly, tomorrow he'd take the fight to them. The next morning, Alex woke up with a clarity of purpose that hadn't been there before. The events of the previous night had solidified something deep within him, a resolve to ensure that those men would never threaten his family or anyone else in the neighborhood again. As sunlight streamed through the windows, painting soft golden hues across the living room, he sat at the kitchen table with a steaming cup of coffee and began formulating a plan. This wasn't just about defending his home anymore. It was about taking action, smart, calculated action. Sarah joined him shortly after, her movement still cautious due to her healing ribs. She glanced at him curiously as she poured herself a glass of orange juice. "You look different," she said, tilting her head slightly. "What's going on?" Alex hesitated for a moment, debating how much to share. He didn't want to alarm her unnecessarily, but she deserved honesty. "Last night those guys came back," he admitted quietly, watching her reaction closely. Her eyes widened in shock. "What? Here? To our house?" He nodded grimly. They were parked across the street watching When they saw me armed, they backed off pretty quickly. Sarah sank into the chair opposite him, gripping her glass tightly. Are you sure it was them? The same ones who hurt me? Almost certain, Alex replied. Their SUV matched the description and their uniforms were just as fake as before. They're not giving up, Sarah. And if we don't stop them now, they'll keep coming back, or worse, they'll go after someone else. Her expression shifted from fear to determination. So what are you going to do? I'm going to catch them, he said firmly, but I need your help. Sarah raised an eyebrow. My help? How? We're setting a trap, Alex explained, leaning forward. Not reckless, mind you, calculated. We'll lure them here under controlled conditions where I can document everything. If they step onto our property again, we'll have undeniable proof of their intentions. Then we'll hand it all over to the police. Sarah frowned thoughtfully. And if they resist, what happens then? Then I handle it, Alex said simply. Within the law, I won't let them get away with what they've done. Though hesitant, Sarah eventually agreed. She trusted Alex's judgment and knew he wouldn't act recklessly, not when so much was at stake. Together, they spent the rest of the day preparing for the confrontation they both hoped would bring closure. That evening, Alex set the stage carefully. He positioned himself near the front door, rifle close by but concealed. Cameras captured every angle of the property, feeding live footage to his phone. Motion sensors were calibrated to trigger alerts instantly, ensuring no movement went unnoticed. Outside, lights illuminated the driveway and yard, creating an environment where shadows couldn't hide intruders. To bait the trap, Alex deliberately left the garage door partially open, exposing Sarah's gardening tools and a few boxes of miscellaneous items. It was subtle enough to pique curiosity without appearing too obvious. Anyone lurking nearby would see it as an opportunity, a chance to sneak in undetected. As darkness fell, Alex took his post, waiting patiently. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or distant hum of traffic. Doubt crept into his mind. Had he misjudged their boldness? Would they even show up tonight? Just as fatigue began to weigh on him, the familiar sound of tires rolling slowly down the street reached his ears. His pulse quickened as headlights dimmed and the black SUV came to a halt once more. Two figures emerged, their silhouettes unmistakable against the faint glow of the dashboard light. They approached cautiously, scanning the area before stepping fully into view. Alex watched them through the security camera feed, confirming their identities. Yes, these were the same men, their mismatched uniforms, their arrogant swagger. But this time, they weren't just idling outside. This time, they were walking straight toward the house. One of them pointed at the open garage door, whispering to his partner. Both men exchanged nods, clearly deciding to investigate further. They moved closer, their footsteps crunching softly against the gravel driveway. Alex tightened his grip on the rifle, steadying his breathing as adrenaline surged through his veins. When the men reached the edge of the porch, Alex stepped out suddenly, weapon raised and aimed directly at them. "Stop right there," he commanded, his voice cutting through the quiet like a blade. "Hands where I can see them." The intruders froze, caught completely off guard. Their flashlights clattered to the ground as they raised their hands instinctively. "Whoa, whoa, easy," one of them stammered, panic evident in his tone. "We're just checking things out." "Checking what?" Alex shot back, his gaze unwavering. "This is private property, you're trespassing." The taller man tried to laugh it off, though his voice trembled. "Come on, man, no need to get jumpy. We're just doing our job." "You don't work for the HOA," Alex growled. "I know exactly who you are and why you're here." Realization dawned on their faces. They'd underestimated him, and now they were cornered. Desperation flickered in their eyes as they glanced at each other, searching for an escape route. But Alex had anticipated this. Using zip ties he'd prepared earlier, he ordered them to kneel on the ground, hands behind their heads. "Don't make me repeat myself," he warned, his finger hovering near the trigger. "Kneel, now." Reluctantly, they complied, dropping to their knees with defeated expressions. Alex secured their wrists tightly, ensuring they couldn't wriggle free. Then, keeping a safe distance, he called 911, explaining the situation calmly, while keeping his weapon trained on the captives. While they waited for the police to arrive, Alex kept his focus sharp, refusing to let his guard down. The men muttered insults under their breath, trying to provoke him, but he ignored them. Instead, he reviewed the footage captured by his cameras, making sure every second of their approach and attempted break-in was documented. This evidence would be crucial in building a case against them. When the flashing blue and red lights finally appeared at the end of the driveway, Alex felt a wave of relief wash over him. Officers exited their vehicles cautiously, guns drawn until they assessed the scene. Once satisfied that the situation was under control, they approached Alex, who handed over the zip-tied suspects along with the video recordings. "These two have been terrorizing my wife and me for weeks," Alex explained, his voice steady, despite the tension still coursing through him. "They assaulted her, impersonated HOA officers, and tried to intimidate us into compliance. Last night they returned to our property. I detained them legally and ensured they couldn't harm anyone else." The officers listened intently, jotting down notes as Alex recounted the details. Meanwhile, the two men squirmed on the ground, protesting loudly. "He's lying," one of them shouted. "We didn't do anything wrong." But their protests fell flat when confronted with the irrefutable evidence. One officer played back the footage on Alex's phone, shaking his head in disbelief. "Looks like we've got more than enough to hold them," he muttered grimly. As the men were hauled away in handcuffs, spewing curses and threats, Alex felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Justice might not always be swift, but tonight it had arrived. He turned to Sarah, who stood nearby, tears streaming down her face, not from fear but from pride. "You did it," she whispered, wrapping her arms around him. "You stopped them." Alex hugged her tightly, kissing the top of her head. "No," he corrected gently. "We did it. Together." Though the immediate danger had passed, Alex knew the fight wasn't entirely over. These men were just pieces of a larger puzzle, part of a network preying on innocent families. But tonight marked a turning point, a victory not just for him and Sarah, but for everyone in Willow Creek Estates. By standing firm and refusing to back down, Alex had sent a clear message. Justice may take time, but it will prevail in the end.